My name's Harry. I'm a water rescue instructor and boat instructor for Avon Fire Service. That's what I do for a whole-time job. Simon's a crew manager. He's on station still. He does everything. He does fires and water rescue. He's also an instructor as well.
So one of the first things we're going to talk about is hydrology. So hydrology is just the movement of fluids. So obviously water being a fluid, the way that reacts is quite predictable. So we can predict what water will do because it will act in a very similar manner every single time. There'll be things that affect it on the way, but in the same way that you know how you walk and we could predict the way you walk, but if you come through a different building, obviously you're not walking straight through it. You have to come through all the little areas, and the water will do the same. And when it's hitting various obstacles, it will react in the same manner. Okay, so we talk about river orientation. So if we're going to talk about where do we need to go, we all need to know exactly what we're talking about. Yes, this is my right hand and this is my left hand, which is easy for me to sort of understand, but I'm looking at you, so you might see that as my left hand and that as my right hand. So what we do with the river, where the water is coming from is upstream. Where the water is going to is downstream. And if I face downstream, my right hand is river right, my left hand is river left. So if you always think, if you look the direction of flow, the right is river right, the left is river left. So that means that if you needed to call additional help, you can assist. If you're phoning the fire service, you can assist our control by saying that crews would need access on river right, for example. So then we could have a look at our mapping and think, right, okay, then these roads are likely to be flooded. We'll need to bring our appliances in this way to give additional support, but we know we're going to start off on the correct side. So things that affect the flow and the danger of the water can be the volume of the water, the gradient, and the obstacles actually in the water. Because when the water hits things, it sort of hits it and bounces off it. So that changes the way the water is flowing. Things that will affect how much water we have in certain areas. We've got the topography, so what the land around us is like, what's the terrain like, how much water was already in that land, so the ground saturation. So thinking about, we know from sort of our own gardens, if it's not rained for a long time and the ground is very hard, the water hits it and runs off straight away. But the same as once that water started to go in, the ground will only hold so much water, and then after that it starts to flood and build up there. So how much rainfall we have. Water management systems are to do with things like weirs and sluice gates and hydroelectric power, that sort of thing, where they're taking water off. That all also affects how much water will be about and how much water there would normally be. So living locally around this area, we've got the river that comes through. You know what the normal level of that is. So with average rainfall, we just sort of get used to where it is, but that will affect how additional rainfall affects the area. So this is a little bit of the mathsy bit. So we measure our the amount of water in cumex, or cubic meters a second, and so we're thinking like a metre box of water, so a metre cubed, that's a tonne of water. So imagine all of those coming through. If we put ourselves into that water, you've got all of this force coming through. So with that, with water coming through an area, if we have The volume of the water being how wide it is, how deep it is, and how quickly that's moving. If we narrow that, all of that water still has to go through that same area because there's more water behind it pushing it through. So if the channel narrows, something is going to happen. In a normal river, what will generally happen is that it will erode away, and so you'll end up with a deeper channel or you'll end up with a wider channel. But in what we're talking about with the flooding, it doesn't have time to do that. So it means something else has to happen. And the other variable there was the speed. So if the channel narrows, the speed is going to become faster. So it's something that's important for us to know. So even if we're using our throw lines by the side and we stand in an area with a narrower channel, we've got to anticipate that anybody that we're trying to rescue out of that, in that narrow channel, they're going to end up going faster. So again, for the people that like the maths, the force in the water follows the square law. So if you double the speed of the water, the forces aren't doubled, it's 2 times 2, so 4. So if it's 10 times the speed, 100 times the force. So it's good for us to be aware of that, especially if you go fishing along the river and normally you wade through and it's like, oh yeah, I know this area, we can wade through this quite happily in the summertime. Just think, how fast was the water then? Because if the water is 5 times faster, the forces on your legs is going to be 25 times more, which is quite dramatic. So the way water flows, we said it was predictable. Here we've got a diagram. Water generally in rivers takes a laminar flow. So laminar just means layers. The layer around the outside that's touching all of this, all of the floor, that's going to be the slowest part of the water because it's got all that friction there. And then as we come in, the layers can go slightly quicker, but they've still got the friction of that slow moving water. So gradually the layers are getting quicker and quicker and quicker till generally on a straight run of river, in the centre towards the top is going to be the fastest point. Here the diagram's slightly different. The fastest point is towards the outside, and that's because our water is coming around a curve. So we'll touch on this later in another slide, but water tries to take the easiest route, tries to go straight whenever it can, and then it's going to get diverted off. So we see here, it's coming down here, hitting and being diverted off. And this is why we've got the faster moving water to the outside of the bend. Again, useful for us to know because faster moving water over time, we're going to get erosion. So underneath here, you can see we've got an area eroded, and it looks on the top to be quite safe, but you put your foot on that and there's not a lot of support in it, that's going to break away. And if you're using that for your position to stand on looking for things, you can end up a victim into the water. But also thinking the slower moving water on the inside, it's going to gradually build up over time. So we could well get a much easier slope for us to get out on. So if we can get ourselves, if we do end up in the river, if we can get ourselves to the inside of a bend, it might be somewhere that can assist us getting out. We'll also talk about helical flow. When something forces its way through, you've got this big channel of water coming in, it tends to draw in the water from the sides. So we get this sort of spinning pattern at the edge, and that's important for us to know because if we fall into the water at the edge, we're being dragged into this flow in the centre where that faster moving water is. So it's just something to bear in mind. So we're talking about water always tries to move in straight lines. So it's faster on the outside of bends, slower on the inside of the bends. So we'll talk about safe places or safer places if we end up in the water. So we're looking for obstacles in the water, because obviously as the water flows past, it's going to come past that area, be diverted around it and come past. But we all know that water isn't just going to leave a big hole there. So it's going to backfill and it sort of spins around. And this is called an eddy. And that, for us as water rescuers, is quite a useful place for us to know about, because it's somewhere that if we can get into this, if we're coming down here at some at speed, that's somewhere that we can grab hold of, get into that area, and it sort of pulls us in. And it's a nice place for us to pause, a nice place for us to stop. So you'll find that the water is actually heading against the flow in this point. So the water is actually going that way up the screen on with this flow path. And it sounds a bit strange that if the main flow is all going that way, that you've got water coming this way. But have a look. Next time you're doing a river walk, have a look, and you quite often you'll see bubbles or leaves at the edge of the water coming the wrong way up. And that's this eddying effect. There's lots of hazards under the water, and most of these slides will sort of gloss over. It's more for the rescuers that are in the water, and it gives us signs that we can look for to understand, well, the water's doing this on the surface, so therefore there's probably something underneath. So in still or slow moving water, with a big boulder on the bottom, we're probably not going to know it's there unless we can see through. But as the water starts to get quicker, these will actually affect us. So if the water's quite low, the water will hit that and try and rise up at the front. Here it's mentioned that that's a cushion wave, just a phrase that we use. But if you imagine that the water was deeper, it's still going to be hitting this and heading up. And we end up with a waveform that happens. Looking at that same rock from before, if we looked at that from the top, we've got this here, which is our cushion wave, and the water's going to break, coming around that. It's not going to leave the big hole here, as we said earlier. That's going to flow back in, so it's going to eddy round behind this rock. So again, as rescuers, we use this if we want to cross the river. We'll actually get in and hide behind here in this nice slack water before we make our way across. Get your breath, move your way across to the other side. So it's a nice little resting point for us. Again, with more terminology, it's just to give you an idea of what's happening. So here we're talking about the upstream V's and downstream V's, where the water actually converges between two obstacles, and then on the outside starts to break out again. So as we said earlier, as this all converges, the water, same amount of water trying to fit through a smaller hole, it's going to get quicker in the middle, and then hopefully as it comes out the other side, hopefully slow down a little bit, but be aware that bodies in the water are gaining momentum. Talking about the dangers here, so this one is one that we use with our crews. It's showing a phenomenon that happens where the water flow, it's looking for its easiest route. So some of that water is going to go around the side of this obstacle, but you notice not much of the water is coming across. We talked about the cushion wave earlier. So it's something that our crews are trained to look for, because in the absence of a cushion wave, we know that water's going somewhere else. So it's not just breaking around the obstacle. If it's going somewhere else, it means it's going underneath. And that water is compressing through a smaller gap, which means that it's going faster, and that is very, very powerful water. And the reason that this slide is very important to show you guys today is that picture, although it's meant to look like rocks, it also looks a little bit similar to something that you might have driven here today. So think about a car that's driven into floodwater with water racing past it. Some of that water is going to go around the sides, but the water is also going to find its path underneath, and that water is going to be powerful and it's going to be quick. And the danger is that we get sucked into this siphon. So our crews are taught to never be upstream of a vehicle. So if the vehicle's in the water, we will be staying about sort of 10 meters away if we are upstream of it, and we have to make sure that we're not falling over, because the danger is that we get sucked in and sucked underneath this vehicle. Talk about other hazards that we have in flooded water. Things that are quite normal. Park benches, for example, here. Lovely thing to sit on a summer's day. In a flooded area, that becomes something that, like a sieve, our water can pass through, but large obstacles can't, and they get caught there. We're quite large obstacles, so if the water is flowing quickly along this area and we get caught on that, you will get held against it. And the water is very, very powerful. So depending on how quickly that water is flowing, that could be something that we end up trapped and cannot self-rescue from, and would need other people to help us. So there's lots of different things that can form strainers. We've got man-made objects here, but you've also got nature as well. How many times have you done a walk along the rivers after we've had flooded conditions? You see lots of toilet rolls all stuck, or toilet paper all stuck in the trees sort of lower down. And if you think how the water level has got up, and all the tree canopies have now become strainers. So if we're in that water, that's somewhere that we can end up trapped. That's just showing there's a few logs in here. We've got the tree canopies going across. You've also got tree roots that are exposed as well, and all of these form hazards to us as this sort of strainer sieve type thing. So hydraulic stoppers here. This is something I'm not too familiar with, sort of very local, for any man-made weirs around this area. But this one is important because even if you don't have any man-made weirs, once we start to get into the flooded conditions, the way a weir works, and you have a high point which then drops down. If you think that somebody's got a garden with a garden wall, when the water's running off that, it acts in the same way that a weir does. So the water drops down. So it's just to sort of touch on this where the water is rising up, dropping down the other side, and we get a rotation spin. So I've got a better diagram of that. So that's a natural weir, not a man-made weir. The fortunate thing about this one, although it doesn't show too well, the sides on this one, it's a natural area so that the water's got somewhere to dissipate. It's not big solid concrete walls. The water can dissipate, which makes it a slightly less dangerous place to be, but still very dangerous. So this is the phenomenon we talked about earlier on, where we get, so rather than where the water level was down here, we got our cushion wave on the front. So here it's coming up, dropping down, bouncing off the bottom, coming up, dropping down, and it's losing some of its power going up and down, but you've still got the force coming forwards. But the phenomenon it leaves is these waves called a wave train or a standing wave. So quite often you might walk along, sometimes you'll see it at the beach, where you've got like 3 or 4 waves just somewhere along the edge, and it's a good indicator that there's rocks below. Something that we look out for might be less, it's not really going to show on our projectors, unfortunately. So here's a diagram showing the phenomenon of this hydraulic stopper. So the water's rising up around this sort of reaction wave. You do get a little bit of recirculation there, but the water that ends up coming over drops down. And because it comes down, it bounces off the bottom, will spin up, and it'll have a tendency to cause this sort of washing machine effect. And with this spinning in one direction, as it's hitting other water that's passing through, that tends to give, so you get a circulation in one direction, which causes another circulation in the other direction. And because of these two ending up sort of spinning round, some of the water ends up sort of spitting up, and it looks a little bit like boiling water, and that's why they term that the boil line. So if we put in some of our diagrams, we've got the reaction wave, we've got the face, got the backwash or the toe back, got the boil line, got the outwash. So the face is important to us because the steeper it is, the more powerful this feature will become. The taller it is, the more powerful it can become. And then the backwash is important to us because we will get pulled, if we're in this or a casualty is in this, they're going to get pulled this way. If they stay in this backwash, and they're going to circle round until at some point, hopefully you end up on the outwash and get pushed away from that risk. But it's this recirculation that is the dangerous point of one of these hydraulic stoppers or weirs that we have. So down here is like a little hole, might be quite visible. This sort of indentation in the water might not, depending on many features of the weir. But the thing here is we're entraining a lot of air. So why would the amount of air that's entrained in there be important to us to know? Think about our natural buoyancy in water. You may be somebody that, you know, whenever you go to the swimming pool or the beach, you quite happily float on the top. But also, we generally, if we're doing work around water, we might wear some form of aid, be that a life jacket or a buoyancy aid. Those are things that float very well in water, but if you hold them in air, they drop to the floor. It doesn't give you any additional buoyancy in air. So imagine if you're in this area here and you're wearing a life jacket or buoyancy aid, that's still giving you 40 to 60% less buoyancy than it would have done in the water you were in previously. Harry and I have been teaching for about 15, 16 years, and quite often people say, oh yeah, well I've heard that if you get caught in one of those, take the buoyancy aid off, because that way you'll manage to get out and you'll be able to swim down to the bottom and swim out. So the issue with that is there is a very small chance that you might be able to do that. The advantage of the buoyancy aid is it's still giving you 40 to 60% extra buoyancy, so the likelihood is that you're coming up every now and again and you can get that little bit of air. Down there's no air, it's just water. Nobody that I've taught so far can breathe underwater. I'm still waiting to see them, but at least if you keep your buoyancy aid on, the chance is that somebody will see you because you'll keep coming up. You take off the PPE that you're given, you are on the bottom, nobody can see you, and the likelihood is that you're still going to remain in this washing machine. So, how long ago did they redo Bath Weir? Was that about 12, 15 years ago?
12 years, yeah.
So, Bath Weir, quite a famous thing, looks beautiful, people swim there in the summer. It is such a dangerous place. So the bottom area, you've got this churning round, and there was a hole underneath that they filled with rocks. And that hole, they reckon, was about the size of a double-decker bus, had just churned away under that beautiful weir, and we had quite a few fatalities at that weir, and that was how dangerous that place was. So we train there in the summer when we haven't had lots of rainfall, just so that our crews get a feel for that area, and we'll actually come right up to the weir face at the bottom, and I get them to feel underneath, and already you can feel that erosion out of these rocks that they've put down there. Your foot's going in further every year. So just be aware, very, very dangerous to us, but also be aware that a natural weir can occur in flooding.
Excuse me, could I just ask
Yes.
a question on weirs? Because you said that we don't have that too many around here.
Yeah.
Where I am in Sprass Bridge, we have a
Yes.
very fierce weir right
Do
on the bridge.
you?
Yes.
Brilliant.
So as you go over the bridge,
Yeah.
right, as you're coming into Chumagra on the right hand side, there's a weir there,
Okay.
which runs quite happily. When it's flooding, it is absolute. You can hardly hear, because it's coming over really
go.
fast there, and that's my sort of little patch.
So that is
So
your
I
bit,
know
yeah.
exactly how that
Okay.
works, and
Yep.
it's really quite scary. And we have railings along there.
Sure.
But if ever a car came over there and went into it, had it,
So,
it would be
this
terrible.
is the thing. So
Yeah.
a very, very dangerous place to be. They do look beautiful when they're sort of normal conditions, but yeah, it's really, really important to hear from the local groups as well, so that we know where our danger spots could be. So thank you very much. We'll all stopper. So this is a picture of two very, very different weirs. So this is our natural weir. We've got a little kayaker playing in that. The thing here is the recirculation that's happening. There's a lot sort of happening on the surface. This one here, unfortunately, again, our technology is failing us. But a lot of this bubbling and boiling is happening much further down. On a clearer picture of this, you can actually see the level difference between after we've crossed our boil line and where we've got our recirculation here, and it actually drops quite dramatically. So we can sort of see the difference between sort of a more benign situation and something that is going to be pretty impossible to escape from. So we can look at different shapes of weirs. For our crews, we look at this because we used to talk about smiling and frowning. We don't anymore. Weirs are dangerous. The worst weirs to us are the recirculations that have solid sides to them, because the power has got nowhere to dissipate, sort of going out towards the sides, and it makes it very difficult to break free from. So there's lots of different shapes of weirs. And they are all dangerous. So I think that is Cromwell Weir, which was designated as one of our most dangerous places in the country water-wise, because accidents that they've had there in the past claimed a lot of lives. And again, in that picture, looks very pretty, but the recirculation there is very, very dramatic. We risk assess weirs as we come across them, and this goes onto our computer system. So we look at them and we have to risk assess areas, partly for our training, but also so that we know as a fire service where our risks are. So as we come across them, we look at lots of different things, and each weir is then given a score because of this, and then we know when we're heading to an incident there, what we're likely to be facing.